Pope Leo XIV affirms family is based on union between a man and a woman. Unborn has inherent dignity.
Note, for example, how alternative families comprised of same-sex partners and their adopted children are so benignly and sympathetically portrayed in television programs and cinema.
Because they are benign. Hello lovely people, welcome back to my channel, welcome if you are new. My name is Emma. Watch out ladies, there's a new pope in town. And it's not me. I know, I'm as disappointed as you are. It turns out Donald Trump and I do have one thing in common, and that's that neither of us are eligible to be the new pope. Today I want to find out everything I can about Pope Leo XIV, as well as giving a little dive into why we even care. I really wanted to get a costume pope hat for this video, but they were either supremely shit or really expensive. Like, I'm not going to spend 80 quid on a costume pope hat when this crab hat plus bow tie is a £5. Plus, when I wiggle my head, his claws move. So, what does a pope do? Why does anyone who isn't Catholic actually care? The pope is the Bishop of Rome, the sovereign of Vatican City, and head of the Catholic Church and all 1.3 billion Catholics. He's elected by the Papal Conclave, a big... I'm sorry, this is actually really distracting. He's elected by the Papal Conclave, a big gathering of cardinals eligible to vote. In the most nutshell of nutshells, the Pope is important because he has been important for a long time. Although less so in the modern secular world than in previous ages. In the Middle Ages, popes were extremely influential in Western Europe, even arbitrating between Christian monarchs. That gives you a hint as to the legacy of why we care so much about the Pope today. The popes had a pretty significant political influence throughout history, although in recent years the papacy has dialed back to focusing more specifically on religious issues, which, you know, good. The Pope is also technically head of the world's largest non-governmental provider of education and healthcare services. That's in the form of Catholic schools, hospitals, homes for the elderly, things like that. So it's important to note that a part of the importance of the Pope is his responsibility as representative of the Church, responsible for running services that a significant number of people do use every single day. Bro, if anyone can take me seriously for 5 seconds, I will be so impressed. For those reasons, and because of a general precedent, the Pope has importance because of the importance that people put onto the Pope. By which I guess I mean, have you noticed that a lot of political leaders seem to suddenly become Catholic, as it were, as soon as they mention or talk to the Pope? I've always found it a little weird, personally, myself, that the world seems to treat the Pope as if he's genuinely in communion with God, even if that's not their religious belief. I don't know, I find that a little weird, but whatever. The Pope is important because he is, and so we must take note of his social positions. The previous Pope, Pope Francis, may he rest in peace. I am so sorry for saying that in this hat. Pope Francis was a notable figure for several reasons. He was the first Latin American Pope, he was the first Pope born outside of Europe since the 8th century. More importantly, especially for the Catholic Church, he was openly progressive. Pope Francis used his position to emphasise the need for support for the poor and the needy. He was an environmentalist, he was a critic of trickle-down economics. He advocated for the inclusivity of LGBTQ plus people in the Church, caveat to that coming shortly. He supported the decriminalisation of homosexuality. He vocally decried the rise of anti-immigration sentiment and talked about the need to protect refugees. He signed a treaty with Palestine and called for investigations into war crimes committed by Israel. I mean, that is a hell of a legacy for a progressive Catholic. And now for my own brief caveat, Pope Francis was still a Catholic and leader of the Catholic Church, which, for present day and historical reasons, is kind of inherently problematic if you are progressive. And so even the most progressive Pope Francis had frustrating stopping points for his progressive views. He supported the inclusivity of LGBT plus people and allowed them to be blessed individually but not in a liturgical context, and still upheld the ban on blessing same-sex unions. He did a lot for queer Catholics, but it's still not equality, and we shouldn't pretend that it is. Similarly, Pope Francis did address, technically, the role of women in the Church. Catholic women have been advocating for their own positions in the Church for a long, long time. A lot of hard work has gone into very little change. Pope Francis essentially highlighted the importance of women in a biblically feminine way, characterizing women's work as charitable, non-violent, compassionate, all the other femininely feminine traits, according to the Catholic Church, as if the entirely male-run church isn't charitable. or wouldn't be any of those things if women didn't exist. It's an awful way of looking at men and women, but Catholic. He did highlight some of the struggles that women face today. He basically said that women should be respected in the church and given more say, but not as priests or deacons. That should still be banned. Because women are there to be nice and compassionate and supportive, not scholars or leaders. Boo, Catholic Church. Come on now. It's 2025. With an entirely male-led organisation that has long had submissive women and gender-normative ideas as part of its doctrine, I can't see the Church's position on women changing anytime soon, or really ever, unless the women of the Catholic Church really take a stand, and a more aggressive stand. Of course, that is probably part of why the teachings are about being meek and submissive and not taking a stand and deferring to your husband, your male priest, etc. Catholic women's advocates do their best speaking and writing and send all these letters, and the Catholic Church says, you guys rule, but you can't be priests. Every time. Go knit a sweater for a homeless child now, dear. No matter the woman's theological expertise. It's frustrating. Okay, moving on. Okay, so that's the Pope and the legacy of the previous lad, Francis. But there's a new Pope in town, and the world is desperate to know his views. So here's everything we know so far about Pope Leo XIV. Pope Leo XIV, born Robert Francis Prevost, is an American! He's from Chicago! America! His papal name is inspired by Pope Leo XIII. This is the general Pope way. When they choose their papal name, it's a sign that they're continuing the legacy of the last Pope to hold that name, pretty much. Pope Leo XIII was known as a more socially conscious Pope. Leo XIV has a degree in mathematics and an interesting missionary history that seems to have disposed him as a defender of human rights and anti-violence at the core of his messaging. He was allegedly an ally of Pope Francis, and his supporters in the conclave described him as a sort of agreeable, middle-of-the-road type figure, blending some of the progressive views of Pope Francis with some more traditionalist values. None of this tells us very much, so let's dive deeper using today's sponsor, Ground News. I'm just going to type in Pope Leo. Yeah, 705 recent stories, because that's just going to be the easiest way to find the latest news. So there's a blind spot here that I'm going to make a note of to take a look at later. This was only published 5 hours ago, which is why we've only got the one source right now, but the source that we do have is very high factuality and centre-leaning, so that seems like a fairly safe bet. Pope Leo XIV affirms family is based on union between a man and a woman. Unborn has inherent dignity. So here are the traditionalist values that we heard so much about, aka anti-progressive family values. But pretty standard Catholic fare. Pope Francis being so openly welcoming of LGBTQ plus people was an outlier, to be honest, in the Catholic faith. In terms of the church organisation, your day-to-day Catholic might be different. Certainly in the UK, all the Catholics I know are much more welcoming and inclusive than the institution of the church. Pope Leo XIV affirmed Friday that the family is founded on the stable union between a man and a woman, and that the unborn and elderly enjoy dignity as God's creatures, articulating clear Catholic teaching on marriage and abortion at the start of his pontificate. This story's from a week ago. It shows you how much coverage there is of Pope Leo at the moment, because this is from a week ago and we have 121 sources on this story. Pope Leo tells cardinals they must continue the precious legacy of Pope Francis. Let's just have a quick look at the bias comparison, because that is such a helpful tool. Left-leaning outlets frame Pope Leo XIV's election largely through a lens of political conflict, emphasising antagonism from MAGA supporters, and portraying the Pope as a progressive climate and social justice champion, which is interesting considering it's only a week before the Pope affirming some very right-wing conservative values that they would probably much more appreciate. In contrast, right-leaning coverage de-emphasises political tensions, instead valorising the Pope's role as a humble servant, preserving forsaken traditions. Mostly I've heard that revolves around him wearing traditional dress and things like that, and continuing a precious legacy, employing reverent and unifying rhetoric that underscores continuity and spiritual authority. The pivotal dividing lines lie in interpretations of Pope Leo's political engagement. Left sees potential culture wars, 100%. I mean, I don't think his statements on the the best true stable family doing anything positive for Catholic LGBTQ plus people or just queer people in general, because, that's going to galvanize bigots, because of course it is. The right stresses theological fidelity, while the centre adopts a more measured tone, predicting tensions without passion. As one would expect. So this is pretty good. You can see we've got 87% of our sources here are high factuality. Only 7% of the sources are independent news. This is good, by the way, if you're using Ground News, which I do recommend. You get a similar news topics thing here, so you can just add these to your feed if you want to get regular updates about, say, what Pope Leo is saying. Interestingly, 40% of the sources lean left. It's not a very skewed distribution because everyone on every end of the political scale is going to be commenting on this story, but I did think it was kind of interesting. Let's take a look at this German cabinet source because it's very high factuality and centre leaning. Pope Leo XIV signals intention to walk in Francis's footsteps. In his first meeting of cardinals as Pope, the US-born pontiff praised the legacy of the late Pope Francis. He explains, like we already discussed, that his name was inspired by Pope Leo XIII and reflects his commitment to social issues. Leo praised the late Francis's dedication to the sober simplicity of life. He cited the late Pope's focus on courageous and trusting dialogue with the contemporary world in its various components and realities. So this is something that's super interesting. Pope Leo XIV seems to be interested in technology and how that's affecting the people of the world. Leo XIV argued that the Catholic Church must lead in protecting workers, particularly from threats posed by artificial intelligence. AI posed new challenges for the defense of human dignity, justice, and labor. This is interesting too. The new Pope's 2-hour meeting with the cardinals followed a new format. Instead of offering a speech and expecting the clerics to just listen, Leo opened the floor after his prepared address for comment from any cardinal. In the meeting, the attendants were allowed to voice their opinions and concerns regarding the issues facing the church. Look at all these old Catholic men. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. They literally are all old Catholic men. For a while, there was / still is a rule introduced not that long ago that no cardinal over the age of 80, or no cardinal over the age of 80 can vote in a conclave, which is interesting. But there are exceptions, like when there isn't somebody under 80 available, blah, blah, blah. Because it really is a very specific demographic in that room, isn't it? Like, of course, the Catholic Church's position on women as priests and deacons isn't changing when it's a big room of old Catholic men. Let's just have a quick look at some of the left-leaning headlines so we can compare. Pope Leo XIV might be the climate champion we need. Leo XIV will find a curio with more lay people. Pope Leo pledges to pursue the reforms of Pope Francis. Tells cardinals they must continue precious legacy of Pope Francis. Trump's MAGA world predicts friction between the Pope and the President. Okay, there's a very clear political leaning in those. What about the right side? Pope Leo XIV's first address draws similarities to Pope Francis's papacy while preserving forsaken traditions. Path from modern church that follows Pope Francis' steps. Pope Leo says church should take the lead against AI. And just he's celebrated. Excluding Fox News' forsaken traditions one, there's a lot more political edge in the left-leaning articles here than the right-leaning, which is kind of interesting. Ground News is an excellent way to catch up on the news while seeing the bias distribution, the factuality rating, and the ownership of all sources. As you can see here, we can easily compare the biases, see what the left, the centre, and the right are saying on a particular story. One of my favourite features is the blind spot feed. Here you can see stories disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum, aka stories that you might otherwise have missed because they're outside your political bubble. Very important. Such as this story from 7 days ago, a 2012 video shows comments from new Pope that disappoint LGBTQ activists. According to Ground News, this has zero right-leaning coverage, so that's super important to check on. Using the Vantage plan, you get unlimited access to all features, including the blind spot feed. Go to ground.news/Emma Thorne, scan my QR code to check it out, get 40% off the Vantage plan. Checking out Ground News via my link not only supports me and this channel, it helps you become a better news consumer, and it supports an independent platform trying to make the news more transparent, which is something that we need more than ever right now. Check it out using the link down below. Thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Let's take a look. We've got a lot of high factuality sources again to choose from. Let's go for NBC News. Track record in LGBTQ plus issues. It doesn't say the plus. I added that. Leo's past comments on LGBTQ issues are limited, though several LGBTQ Catholics expressed concern about remarks he reportedly made in an address to church leaders over a decade ago. During the 2012 Synod of Bishops, then Father Prevost reportedly lamented the challenges presented to the Catholic Church due to sympathetic media portrayals of alternative families. Francis de Bernardo here, the executive director of New Ways Ministry, called the remarks disappointing. He said, "We pray that in the 13 years that have passed, 12 of which were under the papacy of Pope Francis, that his heart and mind have developed more progressively on LGBTQ plus issues, and we will take a wait-and-see attitude to see if this has happened." Unfortunately, I don't want to jump the gun too soon on this topic, but his most recent comments do seem to imply that he has a very heteronormative view of what is a good family, referring to a union between a man and a woman as a stable family implies he still thinks that same-sex unions are inherently unstable.
Western mass media is extraordinarily effective in fostering within the general public enormous sympathy for beliefs and practices that are at odds with the gospel. For example, abortion, homosexual lifestyle, euthanasia. When religious voices are raised in opposition to these positions, mass media can target religion, labeling it as ideological and insensitive in regard to the so-called...
In what way is religion not ideological? 2012 is a while ago, so maybe he's changed. But I don't like this.
The sympathy for anti-Christian lifestyle choices that mass media fosters is so brilliantly and artfully ingrained in the viewing public that when people hear the Christian message, it often inevitably seems ideological and emotionally cruel.
Of course it's ideological. Religion is ideological. That's a very stupid comment, in my opinion.
Cruel, by contrast to the ostensible humaneness of the anti-Christian perspective.
What a strange thing to admit that this anti-Christian media, this is very conspiracy-esque as well, the anti-Christian biased media. But how funny to paint, literally, with your words, that opposition as more humane, as the humane alternative.
Pastors who preach against the legalization of abortion or the redefinition of marriage are portrayed as being ideologically driven,
yes,
severe and uncaring,
true,
not because of anything they say or do, but because their audiences contrast their message with...
No, it is because of what they say they do, and they do. It's because they're trying to legislate people's bodies. That is both definitely ideological and not just to some perception, but it's because they're trying to affect real people's lives, people that they have nothing to do with. Ew, this is awful.
With the sympathetic, caring tones of media-produced images of human beings who, because they are caught in morally complex life situations, opt for choices that are made to appear as healthful and good. Note, for example, how alternative families comprised of same-sex partners and their adopted children are so benignly and sympathetically portrayed in television programs and cinema.
Because they are benign. All of the children out there that desperately need adopting, and this is what you choose to go after. I echo de Bernardo's hope, at the very least, that the current Pope Leo is not now as brazenly offensive about his views as he was back then, because that was disgusting. Dignity USA pointed out, "We note that this statement was made during the papacy of Benedict XVI, when doctrinal adherence appeared to be expected. In addition, the voices of LGBTQ plus people were rarely heard at that level of church leadership. We pray that Pope Leo XIV will demonstrate a willingness to listen and grow as he begins his new role as leader of the global church." Okay, Pope Leo's first Sunday message, he appealed for no more war. The new Pope called for an authentic and lasting peace in Ukraine, a ceasefire in Gaza, and the release of all Israeli hostages. Leo also welcomed the recent fragile ceasefire between India and Pakistan, negotiated overnight, said he was praying to God to grant the world the miracle of peace. No more war, the Pope said, repeating a frequent call of the late Pope Francis, and noting the recent 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Leo said today's world was living through the dramatic scenario of a Third World War being fought piecemeal, again repeating a phrase coined by Francis. The new Pope said he carries in his heart the suffering of the beloved people of Ukraine. He also said he was profoundly saddened by the war in Gaza, calling for an immediate ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and release of the remaining hostages held by Hamas. One could argue that is the bare minimum, but we're glad to hear it. So this is interesting, and a very positive-looking stance that the Pope has taken on communication. This was an address he made to more than 3,000 media operators on Monday, May 12th. The Pope invited reporters to use a different kind of communication, one that does not seek consensus at all costs, does not use aggressive words, does not follow the culture of competition, and never separates the search for truth from the love with which we must humbly seek it, which is something that I wholeheartedly agree with, and I hope that maybe some of the journalists took that on board. Pontiff also recalled the plight of imprisoned journalists, asking for their release and calling them courageous witnesses to freedom and justice. The suffering of these imprisoned journalists challenges the conscience of nations and the international community, calling on all of us to safeguard the precious gift of free speech and of the press. Environmentalists have been calling Leo XIV a very positive candidate, so I want to see why. Pope Leo has been outspoken about the need for action to fight global warming, according to the College of Cardinals report. Leo has in the past warned against the harmful consequences of unchecked technological advancement and aligns closely with Francis's environmental policies. He's spoken about global warming as recent as November 2024. During a seminar in Rome dedicated to addressing the problems of the environmental crisis, Leo said it was time to move from words to action on the environmental crisis. He praised efforts by the Vatican to reduce its carbon footprint by installing solar panels and switching to electric vehicles. He also stressed at the time the need for the Catholic Church's involvement in the climate fight. He's expected to continue the environmental legacy of Pope Francis. This is also very positive. So, a mix. Very worrying historical view there on LGBTQ plus people. Very conspiracy-driven, not fact-based assertions about the value of a non-traditional family. It seems like he is still very pro-union between a man and a woman and biological babies between them. And anti-abortion. That's all pretty negative. For progressive Catholics, that's going to be a pretty big hit. Hopefully, he's just not as aggressive on those topics as he was in, the past. Potentially positive for environmental activism, positive for anti-war sentiment, freedom of the press. It's a mixed bag. Honestly, it's the Pope. It's the Pope. He's Catholic. It's probably better than a lot of what we could have expected. Not as progressive as Pope Francis, which I think is going to be a disappointment for a lot of progressive Catholics. There we go. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. Thank you so much for watching. Do like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Do check out Ground News using my link down below. That helps me out very much. I must give a big old thank you and a shout out to my giant chickens and colossal quackers over on Patreon. Especially Conla. God damn it, Conla. Most importantly, have yourselves a very lovely week, and I will see you really soon.